Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Friday night Zoom. There's 100 of us attending this Zoom session. And with us, we have David Lipschitz. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, David.
Indeed, you are.
Okay, David Lipschitz, he has written a couple of books, but the last book available that he's written is The Last Blackout. Now, that is quite something, and definitely something that's on people's minds at this stage. And we are going to go into the topic within the book, and we can obviously have more meetings in future, and I really look forward to that. Thank you for reaching out to me and this community. This is a stunning community, a very active community. I believe they're changing the country, and hopefully with your ideas that you put forward, they will take it to heart, and we can do things for ourselves. And I think that's really important. So thank you for joining me, and welcome to the Double ODs community.
Thanks, Desmond. It's brilliant to be here. It's brilliant to meet 98 other people and all the other people that will watch after this. So very happy to be here and to talk about my book, and also to talk about why I wrote this book. And yeah, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, well, I think we should get stuck straight in, because to me, the book, when I'm actually getting goosebumps right now. When I read someone's appraisal of the book, they gave it a 4 out of 5, which I think for someone from Britain is really excellent. I also shared that with the members. And he added a couple of concerns in himself, in his statement about the state of the world, not just South Africa, and that there's an energy and specifically electricity crisis worldwide right now. I will open the floor to you now to introduce yourself, and then start speaking about the reason why you wrote this book.
Okay, so you've heard my name, David Lipschitz. I joke that if you can say shit, you can say Lipschitz. And so that's a bit of a funny one. You can see at the back here, there's a poster of the book. And you can see up at the top, there's other books I've written. And on the other side, I've got a portable solar panel on the wall there. It does generate electricity, believe it or not. Not much, but enough that I can take it to science centers and schools and put it outside and show people that the sun can actually make electricity, which some people don't even realize. I mean, everything we have on Earth comes from the sun. The Earth itself comes from the sun. The sun is, I think, 13 billion years old. So, we're an infinitesimal part of that. I've also got some certificates up. Sorry, my screen is inverted, so my finger's on the wrong side. I've got a computer science honors degree, so I'm a scientist. Did a BSc, and if I say I'm a computer scientist, I feel that limits me. If I say I'm a scientist, then the world's my oyster, like Tesla and other great scientists of old, and some of the newer ones like Elon Musk and so on, and who's disrupting industries big time because he's an outsider. He disrupted navigation, he disrupted the vehicle industry, he disrupted the space industry, he's disrupting mining at the moment. He's disrupting lots of things because people can't see him, because he doesn't fit in. And I look at myself as being that guy. If I was in Austin, Texas, or in California, or in Britain, where I lived for 6 years, then everybody would probably know me better. But I'm an African. I was born in Africa. I've got Africa in my blood. My paternal line goes back 100 years. My father, my grandfather were born here. I'm here to help, and I don't want to lead. I want to work in a group of people where we all make things happen. I've lived here almost my entire life, except in the early 80s when I was at university, we would go into Mitchell's Plain in Cape Town and do extra lessons. We would do extra lessons in halls in Mitchell's Plain. And then in 1987, when I needed to go to the army, I didn't want to go fight in the townships. I couldn't get the general, the chief of the army, to write me a letter saying, we'll send you to the Angolan border, which I'd be happy to do, but I wasn't prepared to go and fight my brothers and sisters in the township. So I left South Africa. And then I was lucky enough to be in Britain in 1993, I think, when we did the referendum, and to actually go into South Africa House at Trafalgar Square, which was a real experience. And then again in 94 to actually vote in the first democratic elections. We can probably spend 6 hours talking about democracy and all its good points and bad points. Obviously every system has good points and bad points. And we're going to see that in electricity as well. And there's...
And that's going to be our focus tonight.
I want to show you... Sorry, yep.
That's going to be our focus tonight, is going to be electricity, because that's on everyone's minds at the moment.
Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to share a presentation, which is a brainstorm to show you, what happened that forced me to write this book. So at the back, there's a number of books. The second book I wrote is called A User Manual for Life on Earth. And that book was meant to be a scientific analysis to show people how to run the planet. But that hasn't sold too many. And what I learned in life from a guy called Eliyahu Goldratt, he wrote a book called The Goal, which I kind of read every 5 or 6 years. And it's a book about scientific progress and operations management, but it's written like a story. And so this is meant to grab people, and make you realize you wake up in the morning at 6:30 and load shedding is happening, but it doesn't end. But let's just go into the brainstorm, which you should be able to see. And I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to do it rhetorically because we don't want everybody to speak at the same time. But what is the most important thing we need? What is the most important thing we need in the next 3 minutes? So just think about that for a second. I think the most important thing we all want is we want to be alive in 3 minutes. We all, when we cross the road, we look both ways. When we in a traffic jam or in cars, we try to avoid pedestrians. The thing that lives in the top of our mind is to be alive in 3 minutes. And what do we need to be alive in 3 minutes? We need good quality, clean air. And so just by looking at what we need in 3 minutes gives us an envelope for the next 100 or 1,000 years. What do we need to do with all of our systems, whether they're energy, transport? We need to have an ideal. It's going to take us time and iterative process to get there. But it's an ideal. The standard needs to be 100%. Mr. Pravin Gordon said we need standards, and he said the standard for the energy availability factor, which is currently 50% or 55%, should be 75%. And that's not the standard. The standard, as Desmond will know, the standard for a operating coal nuclear power station is 92%. So, we need to set the standard at 92%. If we achieve 75% in the next 2 years, fantastic. We're halfway there. But 75% is not a good standard. We need to have, the standard needs to be 100%. And the 100% standard for a coal, nuclear, all those big power stations is 92%. So
absolutely,
we're alive in. So we need fresh, clean, oxygenated air, and that gives us, oxygen gives us everything, and it's an antioxidant. So it's interesting because it's an acid, but it's also an alkali, and it's a mixture of an element that gives us life and also gets rid of disease. And this is probably not going to go down too well with a lot of doctors, but the cure for cancer was discovered in 1931. One of the cures, and not for every cancer, but for some cancers. And what it is it's to put the body in an oxygen-rich environment. And so I take oxygen tablets every single morning of my life since I discovered that some years ago. So, this view must inform everything we do. And electricity enables everything we do. So, the first thing I say to people is, what do you need? And everybody says, we need air. And then I say to everybody, what do you need? And everybody says, water. But there's actually something that you need before water. Because you can survive 24 or 48 hours without water and without food. So what the second thing you actually need is you need clothing to keep you warm in winter or cool in summer. And you need somewhere safe to sleep. So these are things that we take for granted. We're not even thinking about them. But right now, I want clean, oxygenated air. And I want to have clothing that protects me. Okay? And I want to have somewhere safe to sleep tonight. And those are the things that are critical. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to need water. And where does the water come from? In Cape Town, the water comes from a dam called Kloof Dam. It supplies 80% of Cape Town's water. And that dam is near Worcester. It's 100 kilometers from my house. And how does that water get to my house? It gets pumped. And how do the pumps operate? They operate with electricity. So even before water can come to my house, I need electricity. So there are currently 512 cities in the world with more than 1 million people. And if you remember the Torah, the Old Testament, the 5 books of Moses, in there's the book of Jonah and the whale. And it's the story of Nineveh, which was the biggest city in the ancient world with 1 million people. And even as late as 1850, cities like Tokyo and maybe even Johannesburg, I don't know, but certainly New York, London, Paris, all these cities all had 1 million people. 1 million people is the biggest amount of people that you can have in a city and sustain them without electricity. To bring coal to their houses, to be able to bring water, open sewers. Once you have more than 1 million people, Joburg, Cape Town, 4 million people, some cities 20 million people, 30 million people, even 35 million people in places like Mexico City and Tokyo. If you suddenly switch off that electricity, you're going to have the biggest civil war you've ever seen. And so electricity enables everything we do. Let me go to the next one. In a city, even water comes out of taps because of electricity. I open the tap of my geyser in the morning, and you'll see in the book, I say that President Sibongile comes to me in my house. I've invited him so many times. I've obviously invited Ramaphosa and Zuma and others before them for 20 years, but I couldn't use their real names in the book, which we can talk about. So President Sibongile comes to my house, and in the book I say that my biggest luxury is my hot shower in the morning, because I understand how much energy is needed to heat that water. And I understand, that in the past, if you were a king 150 years ago, you had 200 people so you could have your hot morning bath. You had to have people that built a forest. You had to have people that cut down trees. You had to have people that carted the trees to your castle. You had to have people that made a fire. You had to have people that shifted water around, that took wastewater around. And now I open a tap, and water mixed at the right temperature comes out of that tap and comes over my body when I wake up and makes me feel fresh. And then that water's taken away. And then the water's taken away with waterborne sewage. So in Guguletu, you'll see there's 2 scenarios in the book. One of them is at my house, but one of them is in Guguletu. And what happens within a couple of days, the sewage system's overflowing. They're not only overflowing there, they're overflowing everywhere, because a city with more than 1 million people, every city has waterborne sewage. And waterborne sewage needs 85 liters of water a day per person. And in the middle of the drought, the city of Cape Town was telling us we could use 65 liters per day. That's not even enough to run the sewage system. So although you might only need 5 liters for your own personal needs, and everybody said, but 65 is such a lot. But you need to look at the bigger picture. We're not looking at that. In a city, even water comes out of taps because of electricity. And we need to, I'm going to show you a learning curve just now. But electricity's price must be coming down all the time because of the learning curve. From 1910 until 1973, the price of electricity came down every year in real terms. And escom, which is the Electricity Supply Commission, which started in 1915 and actually became formed in 1923 after much research, because there was the Victoria Falls Energy Company, a hydroelectric system. There were all kinds of separate. It's actually interesting because the government says we can't have many power stations on the grid all owned privately, yet in 1922 that's exactly how the grid worked in South Africa. So we were 100 years ago exactly, we had 20 power stations, and what happened is that the people that were doing mining and running industry said, it's all very well having 50 megawatt power stations, but we want to build a big power station, a 200 megawatt power station, which would have been huge at that time. Okay, and so they all got together and they put their finances together and they created escom. And then their mission was, and should still be, which it isn't now, is that they would not make a profit or a loss, but they would take the profits and reinvest in producing more power, cheaper power, and hopefully cleaner power. Edison said we shouldn't have to run out, we shouldn't have to run out of coal before we realize that we can clean our act up. So that's something that engineers and scientists need to do. Electricity's abundance must be going up. Now, Desmond's spoken about this, and I'm going to talk about it. The world's consumption of electricity doubles every 20 years. Even with massive efficiency, we're still doubling electricity. It's called Jevons paradox. Jevons, Jevons paradox. So what it said is, when the steam engine was created a couple of hundred years ago, it was about 0.25% efficient. So you could make, say, one table for $1. But then when they made it 1% efficient, in other words, 1% of the energy in the coal going into the steam engine was coming out as power. When they made it 1% efficient, 4 times more, okay, they produced 100 times more tables because suddenly it became more affordable. And when they got it to 2%, another 100% improvement, they produced 1,000 tables. So what happens is, as the energy efficiency becomes more and more efficient, there's more opportunity for everybody to be able to have that hot morning shower, or to have a computer, or to have everything. So, when you look at your cell phone, the cell phone today, which you're buying for maybe 5,000 Rand or 10,000 Rand, has got $100,000 worth of software and hardware on it from only 20 years ago. So, what I was just saying is that the cell phone has $100,000. So the cell phone has more capability than the President of the United States had only 17 years ago. So you hold in your hand such an extremely powerful device, and you think about all the things it does: GPS, banking, video conferencing, so many things. You can look at the weather forecast. You can look at detailed weather forecasts. I know that Desmond says we don't know if the sun's going to shine tomorrow, but actually we do know at 3 o'clock tomorrow whether the sun will be shining or not. We don't know if Medupi or Kusile will be running, and that has to be another discussion. So the world's biggest supercomputers, there are 2 of them. There's one in Bracknell in the UK, and there's one in Newark in America. They are Cray supercomputers, and their sole function is to predict the weather. And the reason that they put so much money into these is because when a plane takes off from Cape Town at 8 p.m. and it's going to New York, it needs to know that it can land in New York in the morning. And so that weather prediction system is super accurate. There are mistakes. There's things that happen, unexpected events, but there's a very, very good accuracy that when if your plane is delayed by an hour, chances are because it can't land on the other end, not that there's something wrong with the plane. Electricity's environmental quality must be improving constantly. I was in America in 2009 doing some energy courses, wrote some exams, went to some conferences, met some incredible people, and there were big signs on all the airports saying clean coal, which is a misnomer of note, but it's an ideal. Medupi and Kusile are meant to have flue gas desulfurization, and all kinds of other technologies so that the emissions are close to null. The problem in South Africa, which I don't want to get into much now, is that we have coal with a very high ash content. And Desmond has spoken about that. That causes a lot of corrosion, and that's causing a lot of problems. Whereas, Matimba, which was built in the 1980s, those escom engineers, they learned how to use really bad quality coal and to make electricity. And when Medupi and Kusile were designed, those engineers went to the government and escom said, you must use our research to do, and they said, no, we want our power station to be 5% more efficient, but that means supercritical, which raises the temperature and the pressure and makes pipes much more complicated and so on. And we can talk about that. But the biggest thing that I see as fixing these big power stations, besides a whole lot of things, is the quality of the inputs. And if I'm talking at school or I'm talking to uneducated people, then what I say, uneducated in an energy sense, is that you can take chip oil. You fry your chips in sunflower oil, and you take that waste sunflower oil and you put it in your engine in your car, and then your car goes 3 kilometers and the engine seizes, and then you will spend 2 weeks repairing the car if you're lucky, okay, maybe 3 weeks, and then you put the same oil in your car because you didn't learn. And that's what escom are doing with the bad quality coal. If they learned their lesson, they would be taking the best quality coal, even if they need to import that coal, which is a misnomer of note. I mean, Saudi Arabia
Don't have to.
exports oil, but Saudi Arabia also imports Russian oil, because Russian oil is cleaner than Saudi Arabian oil. So in order to get the consistency of the oil they export, they mix Russian oil in Saudi Arabian oil, which we're buying. So forget sanctions on Ukraine, which is another whole story. The world's global economic system is all mixed up, and you can't be sure where you're getting things from. If electricity's price is coming down, then water price comes down, food prices come down, transport prices come down. So this is my mind map. In a nutshell, it's the quickest way that I found to be able to actually show people how critical electricity is in our lives. We don't have water without electricity. We don't have sewage without water, which means we don't have sewage without electricity. We can't have this discussion without electricity. We can't phone our friends without electricity. We can't communicate without electricity. We can't eat without electricity. We can't drive our cars. We can't do banking. Everything in life depends on electricity. And the electricity in life has got to be abundant, it's got to be cheap, and it's got to be clean. Those have got to be our goals. And in those goals, we're going to find ways of doing that. So let me just go to this. This is a learning curve. This is from Henry Ford. You can see I put the notation where I got it from. And what happens on the top left is that when Ford were producing 10,000 cars in a period, it was costing them about $4 or $4,000 actually to produce. It's a thousands on the left axis. But when they got to 1 million cars, okay, it was costing less than $2. So they had gone from 10,000 to 1 million, and they'd halved the cost of the car. And something that Ford did 100 years ago, 120 years ago, is he said a new car should have the same parts as an old car. A new model should have the same parts as an old model. You look at a new Mercedes-Benz. In my opinion, a Mercedes-Benz today should be half the cost of what it was 20 years ago. It shouldn't be 10 times the price, even with the rand being bad. So there's a lot of failure in engineering, and we need to look at why that is. Why is there no cross-pollination? Why does every coal power station cost more than the previous one? Why does, we need to ask these questions. Let me just see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, here's a complicated graph, which I've been producing since 2010. Okay, and what it shows, you should be able to see my blue cursor. So I'm just looking at the other screen. So over here, in 2008, my electricity cost was 50 cents a kilowatt hour. And according to NERSA, it should have gone up the purple line, but it's actually gone up the red line to where we are in 2022, 331, including VAT. These prices include VAT because most homeowners pay VAT. They can't get the VAT back. So I put the VAT here. So the price has gone up from 50 cents to 330, and escom want to put it up 38%. But it's actually more than 38%, and we can talk much more than 38%. We can talk about that because there's a service fee now we didn't have 5 years ago. The blue line at the bottom here is what escom are charging. Okay, and then this dotted line is inflation. So with inflation only, okay, the cost of electricity has gone from 1 rand to about 1 rand 20. So even escom's costs are going up way faster than inflation. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can look at that. So we're not going to go do that now. I'm just trying to show you what's happening. This green line, okay, is the cost of grid tie electricity with PV panels. So I agree with Desmond. Desmond says we need base load for big industry. I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. But homeowners and small businesses and people that don't need much electricity, warehouses, can run off renewable energy. Look how the cost is coming down. And then what I did is the next curve. Sorry, let's go forwards. There. Okay, I didn't put the battery prices in at the beginning. So what I've done is I've just worked out the battery price back in 2008 when I bought my first battery system. And in 2022 when I bought my new battery system. And the cost had come down 95%. And then I just did a trend line, a geometric trend line on that. So that shows how much the cost of photovoltaic panels, including batteries, have come down and will continue to trend down. You'll see at the bottom here, that this trend is constant. We've kind of hit the lowest level, but even with the constant level, then just like computers, the inverters are getting more powerful, the batteries are getting more powerful. But this yellow line here shows you the trend in battery systems. And it's interesting because Elon Musk said, I think 2 years ago, within 3 years, he wants to bring the cost of batteries down by 70%. It happened in 2 years. So it's phenomenal, and there's new technology and new capability and so on happening. There's one more thing I want to do before I go to the book. Okay, this is a really, I just want to go, okay. Sorry, two more things. This graph shows you a baseline in 2006. So what happens is the blue curve shows when Eskom said, firstly Grootvlei, then Ngula Pump Storage, then Medupi, then Kusile would come on stream. And the bottom orange line is when they actually came on stream. But this doesn't take into account the fact that they're so inefficient. And that middle gap there is 50 trillion rand of lost money to the economy because of late delivery of these power stations. Now, the other interesting thing is that Medupi should have been finished in 2015. Eskom says we started our build late. It's true. We started our build 10 years late. Okay, we should have started our new build in 1998. We started it in 2008. That's true. But I learned a new word in the last 3 years. It's called paltering. 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 It's when you say one truth and you hide another truth, a bigger truth. Eskom say we started our new build late. It's true. We did start our new build late, but we don't know how to do our new build. Because if we did, we would have finished Medupi in 2015. We would have finished Kusile in 2018, and we would have finished Coal 3. Kusile is called Bravo. Okay, it didn't even have a name in 2008, but it was called Bravo. And Charlie, which is called Coal 3, should have been finished this year, which means we should have 15 gigawatts right now of brand new, relatively clean energy on the grid, and we don't have it. We need to look into that and how to solve that problem. So let me just go. Okay, this graph here is just showing you that 40 trillion, which is 50 trillion, and the amount of lost VAT. That's equal to 10 billion rand a day before load shedding. So even before the so-called load shedding, Eskom should currently be delivering 60 gigawatts, and it's delivering 28 before load shedding. And let's just go.
If it's lucky.
If it's lucky. This is the Eskom cliff. This is in the white paper on renewable energy from 2003. I got involved in energy in 2004 when I started reading the government's policy documents. And I read this. And I thought, we are FUCKED. Because, you know, if you look at this blue line, that shows you how much electricity was being used. And then the line on the left where it says spare capacity, Eskom had a lot of spare capacity from about 1975 onwards. And what they did is they went to companies like SAB, South African Breweries, and they said, who made their own steam in those days, with coal or however they did it. Okay, and they said to them, what is the cost per kilowatt hour of you making your own steam? And they did some calculations, and they worked out X, and Eskom said, okay, we'll supply you electricity at half X. Because all of that spare capacity is basically free. It's called the marginal cost of supply. So what happens is, once you've covered all your costs, anything extra is basically only the input costs, because all the insurance is paid, all the operating costs are paid, etc. So they went and sold electricity to mines and to SAB and to other companies, and they didn't look at the future too far.
And countries.
And countries, indeed. So, but of course we do buy electricity from Kahora Bassa, so there is an exchange in the South African grid, the Southern African grid. So in 2003, the government said, we're going to run out of electricity in 2008. But it gets worse than that, because there's something, this Eskom cliff, which shows that from 2020 onwards, we have to start shutting down old power stations. Now, maybe we learned how to lengthen the life of some of those power stations in the meantime, but technically we're going to be shutting down, as Desmond says in one of his videos, in the next 30 years, we've got to rebuild Eskom from scratch. We've got to build everything. You know, people talk about the energy transition. You know, the energy transition started at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when the guy that invented the if you look at our clothes, wool, okay, wool has got to be, you've got to do this to wool. You've got to stretch out the fibers in wool. The wool comes off the lamb or the sheep, okay, and you've got to stretch those fibers so that you can make garments. So you have spinning, and then you have making garments, knitting, for example, in this case. And somebody worked out how to take water power, okay, and that water power started the Industrial Revolution. So there was an energy shift, because there would have been millions of people doing the stuff manually on, pulling fibers straight. Now it could be done automatically by machine, and you can imagine the outcry. And then in 1850 we moved to coal and we made electricity. So before that we had steam engines. So we put coal into steam engines, we made boilers, and we created the transport systems of the world running on steam engines. And if you're lucky enough to be in Cape Town, you can go on a steam engine to Greyton, not to Greyton, to Grabouw, and to the Grabouw market, and it's a steam engine, but it's running with oil. So it's a bit easier to run. And so what happened is, when we moved from steam engines to electricity, but we didn't reduce the number of steam engines. That only happened in 1910, when a man called Winston Churchill, you may have heard of him, he was the Lord of the Admiralty back then. He was a young guy, and he said, we need to move the fleet from coal to oil. And he was the most unpopular guy in the British Empire, okay? Because you can imagine, you've got a ship, the ship runs on coal, there's 100 people working in the dirtiest conditions moving coal around the ship. Now, one guy turns a lever and oil flows into the engine. We don't need 100 people. So there was a massive outcry as we moved from coal to oil, okay? And what happened is, we didn't use less coal. We used more coal. And now we started using oil. And when gas and nuclear power came along, we didn't use less, we used more. And now renewable energy is coming along, we're going to use renewable energy, and we're going to use more of the other things. But we have to use them cleverly. Because unfortunately, when you burn coal in your car as petrol, you're only using about 10% of the energy of the oil. So it's a huge waste to be burning. People are saying we need new grids. And for me, as an environmentalist and as a God-fearing person, I say, people like me came along. If you look at my blog, you'll see in 2009, I wrote that all office building workers should work from home. So people, doctors need to go to work, and electricians need to go to work, and sewage people need to go to work, and people that run factories need to go to work. But I saw my first automatic factory in Paris in 1987. I saw an automatic factory in 1987 run by robots. 3 technicians ran that entire factory. So robotics, the third industrial revolution was when blue-collar workers were automated. And what happened is, white-collar workers paid more tax so that blue-collar workers could be unemployed. Technically, they should be retrained. It's called structural unemployment. It happens when the industry changes. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but let's get to the book. You've got the background now. You've got an understanding of how important electricity is. And let me just see if we... Okay, I don't want to go into any of that now. I'm going to unshare my screen. Let me just be careful not to stop the video. Stop share. Okay. So, I'm going to change my background to my book background just for a minute. Okay, so I'm in the way. Let me go this side. Okay, so the Last Blackout is, I tell people the Last Blackout should be happening in the book. We really do not want to have a blackout, because if we have a blackout, we're all going to die. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but you think about it. Desmond asked me to read you the introduction to the book, so I'm just going to unhide that. I'm going to go back to David being normal, and I don't think David is normal, but if you want to meet an abnormal person, that's me. So the book is my first thriller. It's literary fiction, but it's in the future, and therefore it's science fiction. And it's great for me to write the book like this because I live in the future. And my wife and many of my close friends keep saying, David, you're 10 years ahead of your time. But now I'm hoping that the time has caught up with me and that people will take seriously what I'm saying. So here we are. So I've written it like a Shakespeare, play, the first book. And it starts off Act 1, Scene 1, at a house in Cape Town. a city in South Africa. If I speak too fast, please just tell me to slow down. It's a rainy winter Saturday in Cape Town, and I wake up to find load shedding is happening. There was no warning, and I was looking forward to going out for breakfast with a close friend. Load shedding is our South African electricity utility, Eskom's name, for planned power interruptions, a misnomer of note. One of the nice things that happens when you read your own book is you get all this ad-libbing. I've seen this with other authors. I read their books and then I listen to their books on Audible. And the stuff on Audible there's so much more, especially when the author narrates their own book. So it happens when more power stations are off than planned. I open my Eskom to Push app and there is no news. I load Twitter and look for the Eskom feed. No news. I go to the bathroom to wash and find no water pressure. I flush the toilet, which flushes but does not fill. How odd. I go snack something, open the fridge for some butter or milk, and discover that the fridge is a bit warmer than expected. The butter is a bit soft. How long have we been off, I wonder? I went to sleep at 9:30 p.m. as usual and woke up at 6 a.m. I look at my phone again and realize there's no signal for either phone calls or data, which sometimes happens at stage 4 or 5. And I think that maybe it's because the generators, which typically have 8 to 16 hours of diesel, have run out of fuel. And then I go into what the stages are. Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, please.
Okay. The stages represent how many gigawatts. A gigawatt is 1 billion watts or 1,000 megawatts or 1 million kilowatts of electricity need to be switched off rotationally across the grid. Stage 1 is 1 gigawatt for 2.5 hours a day. Stage 2 is 2 gigawatts once or twice a day. Stage 3 is 3 gigawatts twice to thrice a day, and so on. We have experienced up to stage 6 in South Africa, with about 9.5 hours of load shedding. However, Eskom, the electricity utility, has told us that up to stage 8 might happen. Of course, this week, the rater said stage 15. We'll talk about that. At stage 8, we will have about 13.5 hours a day of load shedding. Each load shedding event will be a 4.5 hour stretch instead of a 2.5 hour stretch, with our electricity being off for the time of the load shedding event. And if you have lead acid batteries, you won't have enough time to fill them between the load shedding events. You have to have lithium ion batteries in order to fill them fast enough, which causes a whole lot of other problems if you don't have your own PV panels to fill them. Apps like Eskom to Push allow us to see when load shedding will affect our area and are great planning tools and should be supported. Having said that about lead acid batteries, if you have a big enough battery bank which you deplete relatively low with a lot of PV and a lot of backup, maybe your own diesel generator, then it will work. So everything is relative and everything is in proportion. Maybe we've been off since 1 a.m. I think. Then I noticed the eerie silence. Typically during load shedding, people's burglar alarms start going off as batteries start going flat. Nothing. I switch on my laptop with its battery. No internet. I have the most up-to-date fiber line with a UPS, uninterruptible power supply, backup for my network. I need 36 hours of load shedding before my network dies. Nothing? I remember that my fiber line also sometimes dies when it's stage 4 or higher. Probably something to do with fiber needing electricity. Luckily, I have an old Telkom landline, so I phone a friend across town who's never off at the same time as me. He's also off. Then I phone my friends in other cities who are also off. I'm getting worried. I've been distracted recently by lockdowns, the latest international war news, and the newest possible pandemic. I've just finished reading Vaccine Epidemic, An Empire of Pain, and I've been spending too much time in confusion, wondering where fake news is coming from. Is it possible that these are half-truths? True some of the time, but not all of the time. It is 7:30 a.m. now, and I cannot get hold of my friend. Since load shedding started in 2008, I've been conscientious about keeping my car with a half full or higher fuel tank. So I open my garage door manually, get the car out, and I think I'll meet my friend at the coffee shop. I get to the first big intersection and discover that those traffic lights, which always work, even during load shedding, are off and traffic is beginning to build. I'm more worried now. I decide to go back home and pass my local shop. They have a generator but are in darkness. Candles burn, and there's a big sign saying 50% off all cold and frozen food. I go inside to chat to my favorite Greek grocer, Costas, who has somehow survived the past 40 years of globalization and centralization of systems and supply chains. By the way, we live in a just-in-time world where everything is delivered just in time. And in a city like Cape Town or Joburg, we only have 4 days of fresh food in the just-in-time supply chain. So our system is incredibly fragile and will break incredibly easily. So there are things we just take for granted, and we need to be so careful about, saying we're going to save money over here, but we're going to have a bigger expense or a shorter life over there. So what I've done in the book is I've tried to add in, points for people to create debate and people to discuss and people to ask questions. And also, this is going to be part of a series, so all these points create other books. He says, this is Costas, the Greek grocer. I've been here since 4 a.m. to break the bread, and we've been off the whole time. We are never off for more than 2 or 3 hours. And I woke up at 3:15 a.m. for a shower, and there was no pressure. I used our backup 500-litre water tank, and luckily it is raining at the moment, so it is full. But it's still a hassle to go outside and fill up the bucket. It's 8 a.m. and we've been off since at least 3:15 a.m. when my alarm woke me. The other odd thing is that there's been no 4G or 3G or even cell phone signal the whole morning. And my office fiber line is down, and I cannot get hold of my bank. The credit card machine is not working. I can usually phone the bank for manual authorization, but that is not working. Most people who shop here are my friends, so I've been writing invoices and my customers have been signing IOUs. What do you think is happening? I say I do not know, but my friend across town is also off, and my friends in Durban and Joburg who still have telecom landlines are also off. My friend and shopkeeper has just boiled some water on his gas hob, and then I put in brackets the American term, or range, and is handing out steaming coffees and hot chocolate to a few of his friends and customers standing around. That's when it hits us all. Now this is where the online introduction to the book ends, but I had to shorten it because there's only a certain number of words. So there's more in here.
I think it's perfect. I think it's a perfect ending.
There's still 100 people, so I'm thank you everybody.
Yeah, there's still 100 people listening, and I'm sure more people wanted to go in. It's really awesome that you've written a fictional account of what could really happen and make people think. We have Michael with his hand up quickly.
I noticed, David, on your graph earlier on that there was since load shedding had begun, the economy's lost 50 trillion rand. That money could have, in actual fact, created an alternative source for a lot of our water pumps, a lot of the essentials that can keep us going. Why isn't it that a private community hasn't tried to do that in order to ease the burden on escom, so a lot less people will use power, a lot less energy consuming products, lightening on the load, allowing them to then go through and conduct maintenance on the various power stations without the essentials of life being removed?
I think we've kind of answered those questions. I agree with you 100%. I think that I spent the time to create this graph, and on the next page there's a spreadsheet. I'm happy to share this with anybody that wants it. This is the spreadsheet behind that graph. And if the question is if only these power stations that come online on time, South Africa's economy would be 2 or 3 times bigger than it is now. Also, Eskom look at 50 gigawatts, 60 gigawatts as being the total requirement in the grid. But if you consider how much coal is exported, how much iron ore is exported, how much titanium, uranium, platinum, how many other antimony, we have 30 different base minerals in this country, besides all of the other stuff that's exported. All of that stuff should be being beneficiated in South Africa. If it was, South Africa's power requirement is 300 gigawatts. It's 10 times bigger than it is now. Eskom could go on a building spree, building 5 new nuclear power stations, 5 new coal power stations right now, whilst people like me go and build 100 gigawatts of renewable energy, and we can't keep up. Okay, so we need to be doing all of this stuff right now. We need to bring back all the jobs that are overseas right now. We need to be doing all of the stuff at the same time. And I just did this graph because it shows you how much electricity has been lost just with these 4 power stations, 10 billion rand a day before load shedding. So it's not just when we have load shedding that we have a problem. So we know what we need to do. We need to get together. We need to work with each other We need to find a way to have integrity with each other, where we trust each other. I don't know how to do that. I'm not a sociologist. I'm a scientist. I'm trying to find the sociologists in our society, you know, and the marketing people and the economists who can convince people of and Desmond and and other people like us what we're talking about, to make it happen, because it's a group effort.
Well, that's our country. It's always been reliant upon yourself to try and make it work. It's just the way it's run for the last 20 years.
Well, you know, the thing is about that, Eskom have always built the biggest power stations in the world. Eskom's culture hasn't changed with the new dispensation. Eskom's culture is the same as it was in 1970 under apartheid. It's a very big, unfortunate thing with Eskom. Eskom's culture should have changed in 1994. We should have said, what's the best of breed in the whole world, and gone and copied it.
Yeah.
But what did we do? Even with Coburg. Coburg came on stream 2 or 3 years later than it should have. Why? We wanted to build the biggest and the best. You know, you go to Medupi, it says world's 4th biggest power station. It should say world's 4th biggest power station. It doesn't work. We should have built the 20th biggest power station that works and that the problem is solved. So unfortunately, we can blame the new dispensation, but Eskom has got its own long-term cultural challenge of always wanting to build the biggest and best. And it's not the right approach in a country like South Africa. It doesn't even work in America.
No, well, thank you, David. It's lovely chatting and interesting information, a lot to consider. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Des.
It's interesting. My neighbor had a name similar to yours. It's quite funny.
Ah, must be a good guy. Thank you.
Okay, Nico, and then I think we need to end off. I think, David, we can have more sessions like this when you have time, or when you feel like it, where we can maybe start off by answering questions, because we need to drive this information into this community, and hopefully this community will share this information with more people, so that more people attend next time, and I'll make sure that we can get 500 people into the discussion, because it was clearly blocked at 100.